I'm going to Starbucks and I'm gonna do a bit of a drawing vlog. I think that'd be pretty fun. Anyway. Whoop. All right, we have arrived at Starbucks. Let's go get some coffee and do a little drawing. Why don't we? So here we are inside Starbucks. I've gotten my delicious mocha frappuccino and I'm starting to draw. I'm just doing a little bit of a warm-up using my pencil. As for my weapons of choice, it's just a Zebra Delgard. Pretty standard mechanical pencil. It's a 0.5 millimeter. And as with any mechanical pencil, the quality of the writing depends on the lead you choose. Which I think I just have like some really cheap stuff in it. I'm just starting to detail this face a little bit now, adding some irises. One thing I've noticed that I do is I generally don't draw pupils. And it still tends to look pretty normal, which I find surprising. Of course, what would a max mushroom drawing be without a big ass jacket? So I'm adding a huge collar. And I'm also starting to put in a little bit of shading here and there. For me, when it comes to pencil stuff, I usually tend to just stick with unidirectional hatching. Sometimes a little bit of cross hatching. I don't know how other people do it, to be honest. You can see here I'm darkening up the shadow inside of the neck part. I've always been really interested in like old school graphite drawings, like the covers for the Harry Potter books, if you know what I'm talking about. And I've done artwork like that and I always find it really satisfying. I just tend to like ink stuff more at the end of the day. Thing's almost done. Just gonna come back in and add a few more lines and a little bit more shading. After thinking for a bit, I've decided to start drawing a funny face. And of course, to take full advantage of my furry identity, it is an animal creature of some type. Look at that big old snout. When it comes to drawing animal faces, especially anthros, I tend to use like the human eye socket area and just combine it with the snout and like forehead of the animal. I find the more animal-like you make it, the better it looks a lot of the time. And I've always been really inspired by art styles that are more animal than human. I've lit up the ears and now I'm going to start adding fur fluff, just with little triangle shapes. Here I realized that I didn't really like how the left cheek was looking, so I redrew it a couple times. And also adjusted the shape of the jaw. One thing you might notice is that when I draw, I really don't tend to use that much construction. It's more like the outlines of basic shapes. And now for my favorite part. Well, it's kind of annoying, but a really cool thing I found out is that if you use a kneaded eraser, you can pick up a little bit of the sketch. It's like turning down the opacity in a digital art program. So I'm basically just going around rolling the kneaded eraser over all the lines until the whole sketch is pretty evenly lightened. I don't know about you, but that makes it so much easier for me to tell what I'm doing when I go to ink. What you're seeing me pull out here is a Papermate felt pen. While not maybe the artist's tool of choice, I think for me it has a very specific use that I really like it for. When I first started doing inking on paper, I was using dip pens because I was really inspired by manga artists. But those tend to be really hard to use well and to get like circles with an even line weight, which you'll notice here is exactly what I'm doing with the felt pen. Getting those nice even strokes around curves. The reason I like dip pens so much is because you could get really thick lines and really thin lines. So my approach, instead of like using 5 different sizes of micron, was to use a felt pen that has a flexible tip so that you can get some thinner and some thicker lines alongside something like a ballpoint pen or a roller ball pen. You'll notice that when I'm using the felt pen, I'm really focusing on outlines and things that need a lot of line weight. I'll go back later, which you'll see soon, and add a lot of the smaller lines that I need. Now that I've done most of the outlines for the head, I'm just moving on to the neck fur and the lower jaw. You know, cheek fluff, the mouth, and just finishing up what I can with this pen. Now you'll see me move on to my rollerball pen, which is a Pilot Precise V5 RT. You'll notice that I love to put little hatching lines under the eyes and where the nose bridge starts to curve upward. Just gives it a little bit of extra form, and sometimes it makes it look like the characters are blushing. Anyway, at this point in the drawing, I can tell that it's just not gonna be all that great, but I'm still gonna put it through its paces. Sometimes it's just worth doing that. You might notice that I really like to draw the edges of where the shadow would start, kind of like the Terminator line. It just helps give you some extra form, where you otherwise wouldn't be able to see it while inking. You'll also notice that I like to put a really dark fill under the neck because that's like the darkest shadow on the head. Plus, it's a classic manga anime trope. Just a few finishing touches on this one and I'll move on to another drawing. For this one, I decided to make up for my total lameness in the last page by coming up with some kind of cool pose. I guess it's not that cool, but the baggy jeans are. Again, I lay in a really basic sort of sketch, just the outlines of the shapes I want to draw, while also working on other aspects of the closing design. I really like to keep my sketches simple. I think it makes line art a little easier, and you get to be more inventive while you're doing it. I've always found when I have too cleaned up of a sketch, it's even harder to do line art over than if it were a little looser. Yada yada yada, just building out the shapes from here on. This kind of approach is really helpful when you're like trying to do really quick work. I did this a lot when working on my webcomic. It made the line art a breeze. You can see I'm drawing this hand in a really awkward position, and I end up erasing it anyway. Now it's time for a little more kneaded eraser. Just pat that over the whole drawing. I remember getting so frustrated trying to do ink line art on paper for the first few times before I figured out you could do this. It's just such a helpful little trick. Anyway, back to line art. I've started out with the top of the pants, I always lean towards that for some reason. But you can see how I start to indicate a lot of the folds and like major seam lines just with the outline there. You might notice I start to slow down when I'm making certain lines with the rollerball pen. Since it's liquid ink, it actually puts more ink on the page if you leave it on longer, which means you get thicker lines. I'm gonna speed up the process video for this part of the drawing a little bit. I'd rather this not be like a 30-minute long video, if I can help it. The kind of style I'm going for with the outfit here is something sort of like Y2K, you know, Kingdom Hearts influenced. I would live and breathe that kind of stuff if I could. By the end, the drawing will kind of diverge from that goal, but I still think it came out pretty good. You may have noticed the autofocus like freaking out for this entire segment, and it's because I kept putting my hand on the left side of the page, and for some reason the center autofocus that I had it set to chose my hand, which was not in the center of the frame, to focus on, so that's really cool. It only pisses me off a lot. Anyway, the thing I'm drawing is like sort of a chain wallet, but not really. Like instead of a chain, there's just this bit of fabric that wraps around the leg. I like getting weird with it. Here I'm adding more creases with the rollerball pen and some seam detail like the pocket and that little... Oh, the camera fell over. But as I was saying, sometimes I treat clothes like panel design in a mech or something like that and just add like weird shape design on it. I think it always comes out pretty cool looking. Gotta make sure we get that back pocket in. Now I'm just going in and adding a little bit more detail here and there, darkening bits of this chain linkage thing to give it some more depth. Time for some secret sauce. Whiteout. I know, crazy, but it's super helpful when you're inking stuff on paper. It lets you layer things after the fact in a way that's a lot more natural feeling. Especially if you come from digital art like me, where you're used to being able to just draw on top of previous lines. You'll notice I added this sort of like cuff thing to the inside of the jacket, and I'm adding this like ribbed knitted pattern to it. I always think that looks pretty cool. Gives it a lot of texture. And of course we're adding some belly detail, some fur patterns. Would it be a Max Mushroom drawing if it wasn't a furry? I think not. But here you see where I white-outed some of that. I'm just adding a place for that chain thing to like actually connect to the pants. Working a little further up here on the jacket, and of course the trademark big collar. And like I said before with like panel detailing, just adding some of that here on the jacket too. And of course the little creases to make it look more like fabric. Now I'm adding the creases in the armpit and coming up with a little seam here on the shoulder. I think it's really fun to be super inventive with how things look like they're sewn together, especially when it's totally unrealistic. That's just what makes it fun, you know? I'm adding some contrast to these outer parts of the panel detailing here, just with a little of that hatching from earlier. When it's in hard lines like this, it really does make it look like it's also knitted in some way. Finishing up this arm here with a big old cuff. I love me some nice droopy sleeves. I start to add the wrist here, but you'll notice that immediately afterward I decided it should be a big old glove. Another reason why having a jumbo whiteout pin can be a saving grace. I'm going back over here, adding a little bit more fold detail. You'll notice I start drawing the top of the glove with the roller ball, which for some reason I don't immediately realize isn't dark enough. Anyway, you'll see I'm drawing the entire outline of the hand. It's definitely not the best hand I've ever drawn, but it gets the idea across. I'm repeating the same sort of detail I did on the jacket by adding these darker spots on the glove. And now I'm finally darkening things up around the hand. I also start adding some shadows underneath the character, just to like cement it into the scene better. Now moving back up to the collar, repeating the same panel pattern to keep up with the continuity. And now, because this is a furry character, we're going to add a little tail behind the arm. Now we're just going back over some of the fills to make sure they're nice and colored in. As I mentioned before, I really like to add nice big dark spots. I guess it's kind of a callback to the manga styles I like. Just adding more and more folds here, and I guess I didn't continue the seam down the rest of the leg. But now I'm adding more of that hatching that helps the characters sit on the background a little better. A little bit more of that, and I think this one's about done. I did contemplate adding a head, but I guess I decided not to. Now for the last sketch of the day. I wanted something a little punchier than the last one, so I gave it a big hand holding a stylus. Literally me? Perhaps. I scrawled out the body pretty fast, decided I didn't like it much, and went over the entire sketch with a kneaded eraser to clean it up. I decided that since I just designed an entire outfit, I might as well draw it on this character too. I think the whole time I was sketching, I was like, because this is going to be recorded, super worried about making something that actually looked cool. I think that really led to me just not being as focused as I could have been. I think your emotional state can and does play a huge role in your creativity. With that being said, you would assume that like drawing in public in a coffee shop would be anxiety-inducing. But I think I've drawn in like the school library so many times that this is just like another place I could sit down and work. I know there's a lot of artists out there who are like embarrassed by their art or too scared to just pull out a sketchbook somewhere. But really, nobody's gonna care. Most people aren't artists, they're just gonna think your stuff is cool. And even if they don't, like, who the heck even are they? Probably never even seen them before, and you probably won't ever see them again. I can at least say that I've never had anything like that happen to me. People will usually just ignore you. And if they don't, it's just like, oh wow, that's pretty good. But back to the drawing, I think it's about time to start inking. But, of course, as soon as I start, my hair takes up all the autofocus. I'm just starting here with the glasses and eyes are a pretty decent landmark to start a drawing with. I think glasses especially can be one of a character's most defining traits, along with like an outfit maybe. It really just depends on the character design. Here's something I really like to do with noses, is this sort of hatching pattern I always reuse. It's pretty basic, but it highlights the ridge of the nose and leaves a nice gradient on the bottom. I'm using my usual approach here, where I'm just swapping between the two pens, the felt pen for the outlines and the roller ball for the details. I also start drawing the stylus here, which, if you know anything about XP pen, might look a little bit familiar. I actually drew my fuzzy dragon, Nora, holding this stylus for a commission opening I did once, and I still kind of have the shape of it drilled into my head. But alas, my XP pen died eventually, and I got a Huion instead. I'm absolutely impartial when it comes to brands. It's just whatever's cheap and whatever works. But yeah, I'm just finishing up detailing the head, adding some fur tufts, and finishing up the pattern before I move down to work more on the jacket. I'm mostly just repeating the same steps I used to draw the first one, so nothing really new to talk about there. What is interesting though is how I tackle this hand. I got in the habit at some point of using horizontal lines to indicate the knuckles of each finger. I think it does give it a lot more depth because you can actually tell where the fingers are curling, but it might not look as nice as some well-placed hatching. Kinda makes the hands look like they're robotic or something, like they have seam lines in between the fingers. Now I'm adding some more details to the pen. You can tell that I'm sort of just remembering what I can. But it works, and it reads as a stylus. Now I'm going in and adding the sleeve the same way I kinda did it before, but with the opening visible. You can kinda see the wrist poking out there. I end up hatching it pretty roughly. You'll see I'm just kinda scribbling them in instead of carefully doing it like I usually do. I think I was just getting a little lazy with this one. I'm going in now and adding some more details from the jacket design I did before, except without referencing it, so it's just like my memory of what it looked like. Also cleaning up an extra line with some whiteout. Adding some extra details, and I'm calling that one done. Still figuring out what I want to do with this channel. I've had so many ideas in the past of like kinds of videos I wanted to make, because like I said, I've been super interested in YouTube for a long time. Just never had the guts to like sit down and make something and like start improving, because you can't improve at a craft that you don't practice. I think that's really important to remember, especially when you're trying to diversify your skill set. I've been thinking about what kind of videos I want to make next. I'm thinking like maybe narrated time lapses would be helpful, and like process breakdowns, but in like a more detailed way that you would find from like a regular time-lapse video. Maybe tutorials. One of my friends mentioned that they would like a clothing fold tutorial from me at some point. Maybe like perspective drawing, that kind of a thing would be good too. But yeah, I know a lot of artists follow me, so I'd be interested to know what you guys would want to see from me in that regard. Well, thank you for watching. I'll see you around next time, whatever that may be.